Okay, fantastic. So without further ado, we're going to go ahead and introduce the presentation. And if you have any questions, let me know. You can either raise your hand, you can ask in the Q&A, you can type something in the chat. If it's relevant to what we're talking about, I'm going to jump in and answer it right away. If it is not, we'll reserve it to the end. And of course, we can open up and answer questions at the end. So my goal here is to make sure that you have a better grasp on what are the most important systems in inventory management. There's a lot that usually has to be implemented, and it can be overwhelming at times. So I want to emphasize what are the first most important things to do, and then what, to layer on top of that. So there are some fundamental things to put in place, and I'll let you know at that time, if there was one thing that you walked away with, this is the one thing, this would be the next thing I would do, so that you have an idea of how to roll that out. Even as busy as you are as a business owner, or maybe you're a supply chain manager, I want you to know how you can gradually add these systems into your inventory management, so that you can actually improve that inventory planning. All right. So let me know if you can see my screen. This is inventory planning to win 2021. I do feel that even though restrictions are letting up in terms of the restock limits, we do have to get things in place so that if they do roll them out again at the end of Q3 and into Q4, we are ready for it, right? So that's something that I'm very interested in doing right now. We're into the 4th month of the year, and so I want to get as many people as possible ready to weather that, because we don't exactly know what is going to happen, but I do have a strong feeling that it will include restrictions yet again. All right, so a little bit about myself. So I'm Chelsea Cohen. I've been a seller since 2014, and I am a speaker and a consultant. My expertise early on actually was in the copywriting space and the listing optimization space. I have a process and a philosophy that I've developed around copywriting for Amazon sellers. And so that's when I, first started getting into the podcasting space and the speaker space. And it was about 2018 that I really actually started getting into inventory. And the reason that I started getting into inventory is I realized that a lot of my money was being tied up in inventory issues, right? There was profit that was being lost, air shipments or stockouts, overstocking, paying expensive loans. So we're going to talk about that, but that's really why I decided I had to become an expert. I love numbers. I have an accounting background, and I worked as an account executive in a financial management firm. So numbers and spreadsheets has always been something that I've really liked. And so inventory management, I dove into it, and I quickly realized that it was a lot of work. Tried out the various different softwares on the market. None of them really worked or made sense to me. They worked for some products, not for other products. Some of them were extremely expensive. And so I realized that if I was going to make this work, maybe I should just find someone who could help me to build a software. And in that process, I actually met my business partner. And it was about 2 weeks after I decided that I wanted to take on this challenge. And I said, I just got to find someone who can actually, help me to build this software. And of course, met Dan Fernandez right after my struggle of, running out of inventory, Amazon losing my inventory until after Christmas, over ordering, under ordering, all of that. I met Dan Fernandez. Right, he's the founder of Thomason.com, and I had heard of Thomason, been using it in 2015, and so I knew his software, I knew the capability of his company, and so I hit it off with him, and he kept complaining that he was bored and he needed a new software project. I had this idea for this software, and so we just ended up partnering up, and I plugged into this software system that he had. These whole team that he's been working with for over 10 years. These guys really knew what they were doing. And so I just threw all my crazy ideas at him. He jumped in there, and we've built out SoStocked. And so essentially, we've been talking to a lot of people about inventory management. We've been able to basically collect the most common mistakes, right? So I'm going to talk about the most common inventory mistakes, and then what are those things that you can adopt in your business to actually fix that, right? To keep your inventory in stock, to be that, one step ahead, whether you've got a ton of SKUs because you're, say a wholesale seller, or you have a very long lead time because you're a private label seller. It's very important to have all of your data working for you so that you don't get to a point where you're running out of stock. So like I said, I've talked to, at this point, hundreds of sellers in my business, SoStocked. I've onboarded them, brought them into the software. Dan has worked, my business partner has worked on the customer service desk. So we've been able to advance our knowledge and our features at a very rapid pace, because the only people who have been talking to the sellers have been the co-founders. So in that process, I've learned a lot about what people are doing, what is causing them to stock out, and also on the side of being a copywriting, having a copywriting agency and putting out emails and seeing when people put out emails that, then end up running them into a stock out. So there's a few different things that Amazon sellers are doing right now where their systems are not polished enough, and they're actually causing themselves to stock out. So that's something that I really want to concentrate on is, what are you doing right now that is potentially creating stockouts or air freight situations for you where you're losing money because you are, maybe the way that your business is structured, you're kind of missing, you've got some holes or some gaps in your systems. All right, so we're going to talk about the most common inventory management mistakes, and there are actually 3 of them. There's a bunch of different reasons for these inventory management mistakes. There are only, really 3 key mistakes that can be made. There's a bunch of different ways to make those mistakes, but there are basically 3 common ones. You could probably guess what those things are. The first one would be under ordering, right? You don't order enough. So that can happen because your data's off. So we're going to talk about how to analyze your data. Some people are analyzing it in such a way that could have them repeat the under ordering mistakes that they've made in the past. So an example of that would be, let's say Christmas, right? We go, okay, let's order for Christmas. Well, let's look at last year. Last year we did 6,000 units in sales, but last year, maybe it was a long time ago, so, maybe 9 months ago, and, or, even, 6 months ago, and you have to make your new order, and you forgot that you actually stocked out for a week, and you missed out on 1,200 units worth of sales. Well, if you're just looking at, the Christmas period and ordering for that Christmas period of 6,000 units, you're going to place a smaller order than what you need because you're not factoring your stock outs into the equation. And then you end up ordering the same amount, and again, under ordering and stocking out for a week again. And you're essentially making the same mistake twice. So stocking out can occur when we're looking at data incorrectly. We're going to talk about how to look at the data more accurately so that you can tend to avoid repeating those same problems. The next one is over ordering. Over ordering becomes a problem because you end up ordering too much and tying up your capital. And sometimes when you over order on products that are slower movers, it can tie up your money so that you can't afford the orders for your best sellers, right? When people get into that cash flow squeeze, sometimes it's because they're over ordering on products that aren't really performing the way that they want them to. And that also can be done based on bad data, right? So similarly, kind of on the other side of the coin, we've got, let's say, for example, you have this huge sales spike, right? You look at last fall, you had 10,000 units of sales last fall. Well, the thing that you forgot to realize and to put into your calculation is that you were actually mentioned on, say, a morning news show as one of the best back to school products, for example, and you had a huge spike, you made 3,000 units of extra sales. And so you really would have sold 7,000 units if not for that spike. So if you don't remove that spike, then you'll be over ordering and you'll put too much money into a product that won't be moving and you'll tie up that extra money. So the reason that one of the things that happens, we've got stock outs and we've got sales spikes. This is one of those reasons that people don't like to pass the inventory management portion of their business on to someone else, right? You got a lot of people who hate inventory management, but it's so important and crucial to your business that they never end up giving that job to a supply chain manager or a VA or anything like that, because they're keeping all those little things in their head, right? They remember that they had a stock out. They remember that they had a sales spike, but you pass it on to your assistant and they weren't there last year and they don't really realize that that's what happened. They can tend to make those orders that are incorrect. So that's one of the reasons that people don't ever pass this task on to somebody else, is they hate it. They don't want to do it, but they know how valuable it is. So once you start putting systems in place, that's when you can confidently pass that task on to somebody else. All right, let me jump into a quick question. Someone says, Moises is saying, if my products are manufactured in China, can SoStock take into consideration long holidays such as Chinese New Year? Yeah, that's something that we actually built into place. We call it blackout dates. So you put a date there, and basically that will tell the system that, you know, say for a month in Chinese New Year, you are not going to be able to have your inventory produced. So we're going to tell you to order sooner. We might tell you to order more to cover that period of time because it's looking at the future and it's making those predictions and seeing that for that full month or whatever the dates are, you won't have the ability to place an order. The same thing could be done with anything. You can program those yourself. So if your factory has a different set of dates on Chinese New Year, say one factory has this set of dates, another factory has this set of dates, those can be programmed separately. And you also don't want to forget things like national holiday. That's in October. National holiday is the first week of October, and it's a full week that your inventory, that your factories are going to be closing down. So that's something that you want to program into your calculations, especially because those are your peak Christmas preparation times when the factory needs to be preparing your stuff to ship out for Christmas. There's an extra week that you're going to lose during that most important time. So keep that in mind. SoStock will program that in for any of you guys who are on here and are using SoStock. The place that you would go is you go into your vendors, scroll down to the section that's called blackout dates. And then you can put the dates in there, name what that particular blackout date is, and then you'll actually see it on the timeline, which I'll show you inside of the forecast. And I'm going to show you guys how we do these things inside of the SoStock system. If you are not using SoStock, you can make this something that you do on your spreadsheet. But these are just things that that are important to kind of figure out and plan for, so that you don't end up stocking out from these mistakes. Okay, awesome. So we answered that question. Okay, great. So I'm going to go ahead and jump to our final mistake, right? So we got over ordering, under ordering, and then cutting it too close. So this is it could be similar to under ordering, but this is, perhaps you ordered the right amount, but you just didn't order it on time, right? You got busy and you were supposed to order it 2 weeks ago, and then you ordered it this week and you realized that it's not going to make it. And sometimes you can make an express order, but that gets expensive. You get into expensive air shipments. And oftentimes the reasons that you get into this cutting it too close can sometimes be cash flow strains, right? Psychologically, you know that you're going to have to make these payments to your supplier, and maybe you're just waiting for that next Amazon payment to hit your bank account before you make those before you make that order. And so sometimes cutting it too close has a lot to do with the fact that we aren't maybe managing our cash flow the way that we would like to. And we have reports that can kind of help you with that, how to take advantage of marketing some of your products to kind of loosen up some of that cash flow. We're not going to get too much into that right now, but it is definitely something to keep in mind that you don't want to cut it too close because you're either too busy or you don't have the cash, right? All right. Let's talk about inventory management best practices. So if we know that over ordering, under ordering, and cutting it too close are some of the top reasons that we run out of inventory, what are those things that we can put into place to ensure that we don't fall into those traps? Adjusted velocity. So this is adjusted daily velocity, and I'm going to show you how we work with this inside of Amazon, or I'm sorry, inside of SoStocked, but adjusted velocity is what we recommend everyone to use. This is an adjusted daily velocity. And this means that we're not just looking at the total number of sales within a period of time. We're actually looking at what the adjusted average daily sales is. So what that means is that, if you sell 300 units of inventory within 30 days, then you've got 10 sales per day. That's your adjusted daily velocity of 10 sales per day, right? But if you were out of stock 10 of those days, that would be 300 units in 20 days. So you actually are selling more on a daily basis, because you're not looking at, the total sales for that 30 days. You're looking at the total sales for the number of in-stock days. So that's very, very important. It factors things like stock outs and sales spikes, and it removes those things so that you actually have an accurate count of your daily velocity. So let me go ahead and I'm going to jump into our SoStocked account, and you can see how that would work, right? It's important to, with whatever your system you're using, to understand how sales spikes are calculated, how stock outs are calculated. So the first thing that I'm going to do is kind of jump into the sales spikes and stock outs and show you, right? You can decide to turn sales spikes on or off, but what it's going to do is it's going to look at anything that's 150% of your average sales, and it's going to consider that a sales spike. So you can decide whether that is a sales spike or not. You can exclude it or include it. A good example of this would be, we had Prime Day in October last year, based on the constraints with COVID. It's not going to be in October this year. So you might want to go into your planning and remove those Prime Day sales from your calculation, remove those sales spikes from your calculation so that you don't over order for the month of October, right? So that's one really good example that probably applies to a lot of people of why removing sales spikes would be extremely important. And then we have stockouts. This is very important. Any system you're using, how are stockouts actually calculated? So we're looking at, did you have inventory or not, right? If you had no inventory, obviously you're not able to make any sales. So we would say, okay, no inventory, no sales, that is a given. But the other thing that we're looking at with these higher velocity products, so if a product is selling 10 units or more, it's possible that the sales patterns can also spot times when, right before you go out of stock, if you're selling 100 units a day and all of a sudden you sell 10 units one day, and then you sell a bunch of zeros, and then Amazon finds 1 unit, and then you sell 1 unit in a day. All of those times where you've got significantly less sales, something is wrong with that. We don't want to use that as part of our average. We want to remove those things. So it'll remove those things. It'll also remove suspensions. So you may have 10,000 units sitting at Amazon, but they suspend your listing, and then you essentially are, it could look at like a stock out. So some of these other systems that are out there on the market, that was one of the reasons I created SoStocked. When they don't reveal how they're calculating stock outs, you don't know whether they're counting a suspension as a stock out or not. You don't know whether, the day that you sold 10 units instead of 100 units right before you stocked out, is that a stock out day? The day that Amazon found that 1 unit and sold it while you were stocked out, is that part of your average? What is making up a stock out? So that is extremely important. And that's why we allow you to look at it that way. There's only zeros here, but one might show up as like 10 units a day, and you could say, okay, well, no, I'm going to put those back, and you can actually indicate on a day-to-day basis what sales are valuable and relevant, because one of the things that we feel is that you understand your business more than an algorithm does, and so you should have the ability to change and manipulate it based on that. All right, we're going to jump into the velocity real quick. And again, if you have any questions, if I'm going too fast for you, there is going to be a recording, but if I'm going too fast, if you are a little confused, type something into the chat or raise your hand and I can unmute you, because it is a lot of data sometimes to work with. Okay, so here's the daily velocity. So you'll see we've got 30-day velocity, we got 60-day, we've got 90 days. So you can do a combination of these, or you can just simply do the 30-day. And again, it's looking at your averages and it's removing stockouts and sales spikes based on the settings, right? Then you have manual velocity. You can use manual velocity to override anything, right? So we have, like, say 30 days. This is really good for if you're launching new products. So if you're launching new products and you don't have any data, or you launched a product and you had a bunch of fake sales, not fake sales, but like incentivized sales, for example, you did some rebates, and that data is not valid to what you should be doing when you have normal sales and normal organic and PPC sales, you can use the manual velocity until that data that you're getting in the system becomes a little bit more reliable, right? The last one is last year's sales. So last year's sales is actually pulling sales for every day of last year. So you can see this one did three days, 3 sales that day. This one did 2 days. If you stocked out, however, it's going to calculate that stock out into the equation. So what that means is that if you did stock out, it's going to look at the average and it's going to estimate those averages and plug those in to make sure that if you stocked out for a week, it's going to figure out what you could have sold if you had not stocked out and put that into your calculation and the order suggestion. All right, looks like we have some chats. Juan says, if I want to use included weighted averages, what would your average percentage recommendation be for someone doing RA and OA for weighted averages? For RA and for OA, let's see. I'm not an RA seller. You could use weighted averages, but I guess it depends on, what numbers you're using. Usually for people who are sharing buy box, some of these lower numbers here, and then maybe even 180, because sometimes you stock out for a long period of time and then you bring the product back. So I have seen people who do share buy boxes, wholesalers and that category of sellers to use some of these lower number of days, and then also to use the 180. So in terms of the percentages, it might be that 2 days is a little bit. 2 days can fluctuate a lot. So I would say the majority of your weight should be on 7-day or 15-day. If you're doing 30-day, even 30-day, and then a little bit of 180 might be weighted in there as well. But the 15-day or 30-day, or if you're not doing 30-day, the 15 and 7-day should probably be the most heavily weighted for something like that, right? And if you do go out of stock, you can always remove some of these and say, okay, let's see, we'll just pull the 180 and see, if I went out of stock for 6 months or for 3 months, you can still pick the 180 and see what you would have done if you hadn't stocked out, because it's just looking at those days that were not stocked out. We got another question here. Could you explain about last year's sales, how to make that data accurate? Whenever I try to look at last year's sales, it shows me the same number. Okay, so it's possible that if you've got an asterisk here, that means there's a stock out, right? Or there's something that's extremely low. What you might want to do is come in here and you might want to turn off the stock outs because it's trying to calculate what you would do, right? So here now you have, like, this product was stocked out. It's trying to estimate what you would have done. So if you're seeing the same number and it's got an asterisk next to it, it's trying to estimate maybe what you would have done if you hadn't been stocked out but it might get more accurate when you turn that off. So if you've got very low sales, or if you have no sales for that period of time last year's sales may not be the best one to use. But if you are having some challenges, you can turn off the stock out calculation, and then it will be able to pull some better data for you. So you can see, there's a couple of days of 0 sales, and then there were 2 sales, and then there was 0, and there were 3. So that might be what's happening inside of SoStocked for you. If you see a ton of asterisks, just go in and turn off the stock out calculation. Awesome. Okay, have a couple more questions real quick. Abdul says, what would you recommend for adjusted velocity, weighted averages or no weighted averages? So not everyone uses weighted averages. I think more people don't use weighted averages than use weighted averages. If you're really granular and you understand your data, it's a helpful tool for some people. But if you're using a combination of, say, 30, 60, 90 days, it's kind of weighting itself anyway, because 30 days is a shorter term than, say, 90 days. So 30 days is obviously going to have more weight than the 90 days. So it's kind of naturally weighted. So if you don't know what you're going to do with weighted averages, I would suggest just not using it. It's only, we didn't have it for a while. A couple of people requested it, but I think the majority of people are not using weighted averages necessarily. And then another question he asks is, how beneficial is it to count in trend for forecasting? Okay, that's actually a really good question. So when you're using last year's sales, I think it's extremely important to use a trend, right? So if we've got last year's sales, we can look at it on a monthly basis. It's giving us that sales pattern, right? So we have pattern and we have trend. The pattern is, you look at, okay, so I sell the most during the summer season, and I also sell a lot during Christmas season, maybe. But it's going to take your numbers and give you exactly what you sold last year. But maybe you've had 30% growth from this last year to this year. You can see the trend that we've added is 120%. I don't necessarily think that's going to be super helpful to us. Like, you have to be careful with the trend. But we can look at, say, a year-to-date trend. And you can see, okay, year-to-date, the sales increased by 381%. That may or may not be valuable to you. But if you want to use last year's sales, and then you find, that your sales have increased by, say, 30% over last year, you can plug that in and use that data, and that could be very helpful. I've seen that a lot. People say at the end of the year, they want to do, well, actually for the end of the year, they want to do their Christmas calculation. And what they end up doing is they'll do last year's sales plus the year-to-date trend, and that will help them to estimate their Christmas calculations for their Christmas orders, because it's looking at the patterns, right? The sales patterns for that holiday season, as well as the growth increase for this coming year. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and jump back into our slides. We talked about adjusted velocity. So we talked about using averages, right? Not monthly sales totals. That's very important. Also having the option to use last year's sales. Make sure that you have sales spikes and stockouts factored out of that. And deep discounts can also be factored out. We didn't jump into that tool. It's not as used as it used to be, because people don't really do a lot of deep discounts like they did before, back in when I started selling. But it is something that can be factored out. So if you did a deep discount of 30% or more, right, you did 70% off coupons or something, those can be removed as well. Something to keep in mind. And then growth trends we talked about. All right, so maybe we can increase the growth rate rather than including trends. Yes, there's also a growth rate tool inside of SoStocked instead of trends. So trends is going to look at your actual data. And so that's what the trend tool does. It takes, real data compared to other real data, and it finds a trend. With the growth tool, you can make up what percentage. So you can say, I want to increase it by 10% and plug in 10% to that tool, and it will increase your sales by 10%. So if you had 100 sales and you put 10% on, it would say you're going to have 110 sales on a daily basis. All right, buffer stock. So I told you that I was going to tell you, what are those things that are most important? And if I did one thing, right, if I added one system into my inventory, what would that one system be? And buffer stock to me is the most important. That would be the one thing, right? So, so buffer stock, it's also known as safety stock. It's like having a false zero. And I like the analogy of, driving a car, start to run out of gas, and the light comes on, right? You're not going to be stuck at the side of the road as soon as the light comes on. It actually is a warning to tell you you need to get to the gas station. You have enough to get you to the gas station, so you should probably do it soon. So that's kind of like buffer stock. It's like this little extra cushion that lets you know that you need to reorder or send more inventory in, right? You can have buffer stock for ordering and buffer stock for transferring, right? So I'm going to give you a couple of guidelines, but I'm also going to show you how buffer stock works. How does it actually work inside of SoStock, and how could it work inside of, say, a spreadsheet that you have? So there are a couple of ways to handle buffer stock, right? We've got a buffer stock calculation. So there's a couple of ways to handle buffer stock. Buffer stock can be set in number of units, right? So 300 units. When I get to 300 units, I want to have my inventory arriving by that time. I never want to go below 300 units. So that's one way to do it. The better way to do it is actually in days. So that's one I recommend, because depending on your sales, it's going to increase or decrease. So it'll fluctuate based on your velocity. So if you're selling 10 units a day right now, then 300 units is going to be 30 days worth of inventory. Now, what if you start selling 30 units of inventory per day? All of a sudden, that 300 units is only 10 days worth of inventory. So setting it in days will allow, as you increase your sales decrease, increase, that buffer stock amount, that recommendation is going to change without you needing to do that, right? Another benefit of setting it in days rather than in units is you can actually, within the system, click apply to all products. And so 30 days of buffer stock could be then in bulk applied to every single product across the boards. And what that will do is that will mean that even if you've got a crazy high velocity here, a very low velocity over here, it's going to, with one setting, analyze the best 30-day velocity or the best 30-day buffer stock for every single product in your entire catalog, right? With a click of a button. If you're trying to do it in units, you would have to do it for every single product and do that estimation yourself. So that's buffer stock. Buffer stock, again, is if you did one thing to help yourself to avoid running out of stock, it would be buffer stock is my recommendation. You can also do a warehouse buffer stock as well, right? So I want to talk really quickly about the benefits, right? What are the guidelines? What are the things that you need to know about buffer stock? And we've talked about a couple of them. So one of the things that you should keep in mind is that the longer your lead time or your transfer time is, the higher your buffer stock might want to be, right? So if it takes you 120 days to get your inventory produced and live on Amazon, there's a lot more that can go wrong in that process. So you need to consider having a longer lead time. I actually know someone who has a product where it takes 120 days. And so they have, 30 days of buffer at FBA, and then another, I think, 60 days of buffer at the warehouse. And that's because the product is one where it has to grow a bacteria. So it's very, very important that they have an extra supply, because if something goes wrong, they could be out 120 days. Something to keep in mind, the more things that can go wrong, the longer your buffer stock. Don't necessarily keep it all at Amazon. That's why you might want to have a buffer stock at your warehouse, which you can also program in. And then another guideline is, of course, using buffer stock in days as opposed to units. That's really valuable. Having buffer stock in Amazon and also a buffer stock in your warehouse, if that's appropriate for your business. It's not appropriate for every business, but in case it's appropriate for yours, something to keep in mind. And the last thing is something called geo ranking. Type in the chat real quick if you've ever heard of geo ranking. It's funny because we've been talking about this for many months now. I just saw another influencer start talking about geo ranking, and it's not something that a lot of people are talking about, but I think it'll be talked about more and more. And inventory has a lot. Inventory as well as PPC are very much affected by geo ranking, and so I'll talk to you about what that is. Okay, good. I've heard about it. Yes, I have. Okay, good. So I'm not used to being out in this dry weather. We're in the desert right now. We're usually in Austin, and it's quite humid. Okay, so geo ranking is the concept of your product showing up in different places depending on the area, right? So Amazon is not putting you at, page, position 3 all across the country necessarily. They're looking at where do you sell best. They're looking at a couple of different factors. One is they're looking at what areas do you sell best in, right? So maybe your marketing is better for people in California and New York and not necessarily the Midwest, and maybe your sales, do really well in certain areas. So they're looking at that, but they're also looking at your inventory. So they're looking at how much inventory you do actually have, because their promise to the customer has been not necessarily that your product is going to be good, right? They don't make that guarantee of your product being good. They make the guarantee that they have this thing called, Prime, and they promise to do that 2-day shipping, right? 2-day shipping is one of the promises that they make. Fast delivery is what they have, and they want people to keep coming back. So they need to make sure that your product can get to the customer on time. And if you don't have a lot of inventory, right? If you have an inventory that's all the way in California and you have, say, 3 days worth of inventory total, they're not going to be able to cover the entire country and fulfill in a timely manner. So they might start pushing you down the ranking in those areas when you don't have inventory in those areas. They also might stop showing your ads in those areas, right? Giving your competitor the bid over you because you don't have inventory. So it's something to note. And so a lot of big sellers now have been keeping 30 days of inventory in their in stock at all times. Some people more, some people less. 30 days of inventory because of this this geo ranking, right? So something to keep in mind. And again, if you've got a private label, it might be different. Private label, 30 days, it might not be as big of a deal for, say, wholesalers, because you've got other sellers selling on the same listing, and so you might be at less risk of ranking issues because there's a couple of other people who have inventory available. All right, now I want to talk about min-max restocking. Sorry, there's another question coming in. I think this question directly relates to what we're about to talk about here, which is min-max restocking. So again, buffer stock would be the #1 thing to do, to implement, would be buffer stock. If you're going to do one thing from this webinar, buffer stock is that thing. Min-max restocking is a little bit of an extension of that. And so what min-max restocking is actually a system of essentially having a minimum, right? A buffer stock, right? I'm never going to go below this point, and then a maximum. I'm never going to go above this point. And I'm going to talk about the benefits. One of them is just, if you don't have systems, you're not going to be able to streamline your business and pass tasks on to anyone. So creating that system helps you to ensure that you can easily tell someone, okay, you need to tell me when to order based on these settings. So the way that works inside of SoStocked, and again, a lot of these things can be transferred over to spreadsheets. A lot of our system is based on, it kind of thinks the way a spreadsheet does. It's a lot more customizable and faster, but you can do a lot of these things inside of a spreadsheet. It just becomes easier when you're doing them in a system like this. Okay, so I wanted to show you the min-max restocking. So you'll activate min-max restocking when you use the as needed order schedule. So basically that's just saying I want to use a range. Instead of saying I want to transfer every 2 weeks, I want you to instead transfer, when I hit a certain marker, right? So we'll say 30 days. I never want to go below 30 days. I never want to go above 90 days. And so you'll be told to ship in 90 days worth of inventory, sell through to 30 days, and then ship back in to 90 days, right? That doesn't have to be your number, but that is a very common number that is used. So that's min-max restocking. It's something that can then easily be transferred over to someone else. And then let me go ahead and answer this question because it pertains a lot to what we're talking about right now. So Abdul asked about, is IPI an option, right? So Inventory Performance Index and these limitations that were put on a lot of sellers for restrictions to how much inventory you can send in. Is this taken into consideration? So it definitely is. You can see right here, use IPI limits. So you can see what the max ship quantity is, and you can see, this shows 90 days. This shows, so basically it says we can send in 698 units additional of inventory. Well, we may or may not want to send that much in. So it's always going to take what's less. So if 698 was, let's say 60 days worth of inventory, it's going to tell me I can only send 60 days worth of inventory in. If 698 is more inventory, then it's going to tell me to send in my 90 days. So it's always going to say whatever is less, whether my max stock is less or my restock limit is less, it's going to pick whatever is less, but it's always going to be able to, you can turn that on and it'll pull that data directly from Amazon on a daily basis. And that's going to help you to ensure that you're not creating forecasting that is, really wanting you to send in more than Amazon's going to allow, right? So that's min-max restocking. So let me go ahead and I have another comment here. Naray, hello, it's nice to see you. All right, so she says, my last container coming from Shanghai took 6 weeks, 2 weeks more. It usually takes less than 1 month, 3 weeks and 2 to 3 days to arrive in the warehouse. Have you seen this getting back to normal this month in April? I mean, there's still, issues. I think that we need to be prepared for some delays still. There's going to be delays for a little while. I don't know if anyone is aware of the Suez Canal crisis. The Suez Canal crisis, something that happened last month, and essentially this big, huge freighter got itself stuck sideways in the Suez Canal, and almost 400 other ships got stuck waiting behind it. So there were these huge ships that were not able to move through. They were stuck for about a week. And some economists estimate that the cost in terms of loss was about $400 million per hour that it was stuck there, because you had all this inventory that was stuck as people were stocking out and were not able to fulfill their stuff. So you've got hundreds of freighters stuck, and then you had that bottleneck getting through there, and then the bottleneck at the ports. So in terms of things arriving late, there's a lot of backup right now. So we had backup from COVID and all of that, but now we have backup from the Suez Canal issue. So do kind of pad your shipping, especially if you're doing ocean freight, but pretty much anything that's going into the, into these areas, air freight could be slowing down a bit as well due to that bottleneck, because there are probably people who then had to send things by air, emergency. So there is going to be a little bit of stickiness for a little while yet. And we kind of just as a community keep an eye on it and see, if things start to improve. So that's something to keep in mind. Another question, I'm air shipping 1 month of supply, which is costing me $16,000. If shipping is back to normal, I only need 2 weeks of inventory. I can save $8,000. Yeah. So if you don't need, it's kind of like a balance, of the whole point is, you want to have enough inventory. It can end up costing you more to air freight than to ship extra and store it for a little while. So you kind of have to run those numbers, and that's something that SoStock will be starting to develop out tools for in the coming months, is to run the numbers on what makes the most sense financially, whether you order more and ship it all by ocean and store it, or you order less and you ship more frequently and you do air shipment. Running those numbers is actually the only way that you're really going to get there. So that's something that we're developing and going to be building into the tool later this year. And then Danielle asks, so if we want to ship to a 3PL, we should not activate the IPI limit. Right. So yeah, so if you're shipping to a 3PL, I would say turn off the IPI limit. And then when your inventory has arrived, you can turn it back on for all of the transfers, right? So because you want the IPI limit for the transfers. So if you're placing an order, just, simply deselect it, and you can apply that change and then turn it back on after that. Lots of good questions. Okay, so we're going to jump into, I want to be conscious of our time. So we were talking about min-max restocking. So you can optimize your inventory levels with this. You can reduce stock outs. We can reduce your fees, your storage fees, and then you can pass this system along to, say, a VA more easily. And we have the inventory timeline. This is a way to visualize your sales. I think this is very important, whether you're using SoStock or you're working on another system. A lot of the time we don't know why we're supposed to order. A lot of times people will come into SoStock and they'll put all their numbers in there and they'll have this big order and they won't understand, why do I have this big order? And then they'll look at the timeline and it'll start to make sense to them. And so what the timeline is, it's a running account of everything that's going to happen. So you can see this product is going to stock out. Why is this going to stock out? Is there a way to prevent it? And so on. So figuring that out and looking at, what's happening and why are you being told to transfer, you can really get a visual on the entire flow of your system, right? Inventory as it's decreasing, inventory as it's coming in, inventory from your warehouse, any transfers, any sales that you have, right? We've got tools to add lightning deals. When you add a lightning deal, it'll show up in the appropriate location, right? It'll show how many units, and all of that will be factored in. So a timeline becomes extremely important to be able to plan these things, right? If I see that I'm going to stock out because I look at my timeline, how can I avoid that stock out? Maybe I have to remove a sale. Maybe I was planning a sale and I have to remove it. But you can see right here, that lightning deal that I just added for 100 units, that's actually showing up on our timeline. So I think a timeline is extremely important and extremely valuable. The timeline has actually helped a lot of people to avoid stockouts by visualizing what is actually occurring and how to adjust. All right. So the next thing I want to kind of jump into, and we are getting close to the end. Let me do this. All right, I wanted to talk really quickly to just wrap this up. I wanted to talk about what we call inventory-minded marketing. This is something we've been talking about for a little while. We've actually just coined that term of inventory-minded marketing as a term that will help people to realize the importance and the value of connecting your marketing and your inventory. So as I mentioned, I work with a lot of sellers in a different capacity than inventory. I've been working with sellers in the copywriting space, right? In the copywriting space, it includes also doing email campaigns, right? So sending out email campaigns. I've seen where we've sent out some email campaigns for lightning deals. And then the seller says, okay, stop, we can't do lightning deals anymore. We're running out of stock. Well, maybe you should have slowed down the marketing or the lightning deals earlier. If you had planned out your inventory, you would have made more money on sales that you weren't paying lightning deal fees for and lowering your price for, and you would made more money on full price sales and not stocked out and not had to, do expensive air shipping So not planning out your inventory against your marketing becomes an extreme issue that I think is pretty prevalent in our space, you know, making a change to your listing and it shooting up your sales all of a sudden. So there's this connection between marketing, inventory, and cash flow. We talk a lot about scaling, but we don't ever really talk about inventory, right? A lot of the time we think we can't scale because we don't have the cash. Well, why don't we have the cash? First question you should ask is when was the last time you stocked out and how much did it cost you, right? Next question you should ask is what inventory has been sitting in your warehouse for more than 90 days. These are some of the reasons that you don't have the cash flow. They're tied up in slow moving products or you've stocked out on best sellers. So as part of the system, I would say this is probably the second, right? The first thing is buffer stock. You get your buffer stock in place. The second thing is to get your inventory and your marketing coordinated. So we talked about lightning deals. We have tools for lightning deals. There's a tool, we talked about a growth tool, right? Where you can add a percentage increase. And then there's tools for seasonality. So we have tools built into SoStock, and these are the tools that you should build into any spreadsheet that you might be using, any system. And these tools will help you to take your marketing plans and combine them with your inventory plans. One of the things I like to say is that a good marketing plan turns bad really fast when it stocks you out, right? It's very, very successful. Your sales go up like crazy, but then you stock out and it actually costs you more money. And this is something important that I really want to emphasize. Stockouts cost you more money than you actually think. A stockout will cost you in terms of lost sales. We know that. It'll cost you in terms of re-ranking. It could cost you in terms of air shipping, right, instead of sea shipping. And all of those we understand. We understand that those are costs associated with stockouts. The things that people are not thinking about are the discounts that you gave people or the PPC ad spend that you paid to Amazon to drive you into that stockout, right? What is the marketing money that was spent to drive you into that stockout? Even worse, if you're hiring an agency and that agency, the PPC agency, stocks you out, you paid them as well to stock you out. So there's money that you paid into a stockout and then money that you're paying to get out of a stockout. So those are some really important things to understand, that a stockout, if we actually started doing the math, is extremely expensive. It's more expensive than we actually originally thought. So if you're stocking out multiple times within a year, that's going to cost you a lot of money long term. That's going to affect your ability to scale. And then when you go and sell your business, that's not going to be money that's credited back to you. That's going to be money that the person who purchases your business puts right into his pocket as immediate equity. That goes right into his pocket because he knows that if he can get his systems better than you, then he can make more money with the business you already have. So getting your marketing synced to your inventory is extremely important. And we're going to wrap it up just to hit on a couple of things to consider. Your PPC campaigns can cause you to stock out. Discount coupon email campaigns can cause you to stock out if you don't plan them well enough into the future. Listing optimizations that double your conversion when you're not ready for it can cause you to stock out. These are things that all should be factored into your estimates, and you should be figuring out how you can count these into your inventory planning. And that's all information that can be plugged into SoStocked. So when you're doing your inventory planning, a lot of systems take past data to figure out future projections, but they're not including the marketing data. So that's the big difference between what we decided to start doing is marketing data for future planning needs to go into your inventory planning. So you take the past data plus current data to figure out the future. So that's something to keep in mind. Vetting your inventory is extremely important before you start your marketing campaigns. All right, we're actually gonna jump into questions here. Let me know if you have any questions. I know we've answered some questions on the way out. The last thing I want to let you know is I'm going to send the replay, and as part of that replay, I'm going to send you an access to a spreadsheet that we've compiled. The spreadsheet is specifically designed to help you find fulfillment centers because the fulfillment centers are becoming more and more important. So let me know if you have any questions. I don't see any questions so far. I think we've answered a lot of the questions along the way. The last thing that I want to let you know of is that we've got SoStock. SoStock is going to be, we're in what's called advanced beta, and that means that we are on a pricing structure where you get SoStocked for life for the same pricing. We're going to be increasing this pricing pretty soon. When we increase that pricing, that means it's going to go into a tiered structure. We're going to look at, how much you are actually making in terms of orders, and we will, increase pricing based on orders. But right now, for a short period of time until we do make that change, SoStock is available for $79 a month. So if you're interested in it, want to check it out, it's a good time to get involved. And other than that, I would just say, contact us if you have other questions. Reach out, let us know, and stay tuned for our other webinars that we're doing. We're going to be doing one coming up soon. That's going to be actually really cool. We're talking to a broker who sells businesses, as well as a friend of mine, Yanni from Escala, and he helps to build systems. So we're going to talk about efficiency. Get on that list, check it out. Any questions before we wrap up? All right, looks like we got all the questions. Thank you guys so much for coming. Again, if you have any other questions, reach out to us at stock@sostocked.com. And I really appreciate you guys. Thanks so much. Have a great day.